This is a continuation of the last video. In this one I am bucking up the cherry with the split crotch. There are some natural places to start with bucking up a tree into saw logs. If the tree has a crotch and there are saw logs above the crotch, one of the natural places is to cut those saw logs off just above the crotch. One of the tricks to bucking up a tree like this is to be able to see which way the forces are as you're cutting, whether you need to do an undercut first or a top cut first, that type of thing. In the first video, you saw that I dropped this tree using a large dead or dying beech tree as a buffer tree to slow it down as it came down so that I wouldn't split this crotch any further than it was. If you look in the background here, you can see the stump and a good part of that beech tree that came down. It took about 30 seconds for it to come down and let the cherry come down along with it. Another thing to watch for when cutting up a fallen tree are limbs that are under tension or other trees that may have come down with it. When you cut and release those, they can come up with a lot of force. You have to be very careful with those. I'll try to cover that a little bit more in depth in a future video, some tips on how to spot that and how to deal with them. In the first video I mentioned that I was cutting this log because of the split. It can do two things. One, it can harbor a lot of rot, as you see here, or it can continue on down and split the whole tree and basically ruin a great log. I managed to get a good 10-foot log from the butt, completely sound and rot-free. But there was about 20 foot of this that was rotten to the point where it was not worth trying to saw. There are a lot of things to think about when deciding where to cut a tree into saw logs, one of which is defects. You always try to put the defect at the very end of the log if you can. You can't always do that. The other is look for sweeps or a crooked log. In this situation, there is a crook about 8 foot from where I'm cutting now, so I will turn this log into an 8-foot saw log. When I say an 8-foot saw log, I always cut my logs 4 to 6 inches longer than the 8-foot, 10-foot, 12-foot that I'm shooting for a finished product. It is often helpful to step back, get a little bit better overview of a tree as you're deciding to cut. That gives you a little bit better idea of where the sweep is. Some of it you can see from looking at the top and close, but sometimes you got to step back to get a little bit different perspective. If a tree is straight, I will measure the entire length before deciding where I'm going to cut. But since this had a crook right about the 8-foot mark, I decided I was going to cut it there no matter what, so I did that, and then I will choose where to cut the rest of it. Now I measure what is left of this section of tree to decide where I will cut it for saw logs. it has the rot at the one end, as you saw in that one video, so I'm not sure what I'm going to get out of that. It's a little over 20 foot overall, so I decided to cut it into two 10-foot sections. This upper 10-foot saw log that I cut ends up being clear of rot, so that will be a good log for sawing. The next log down closer to the butt has the rot in it. I've cut a 10-foot log. I may be able to get some short boards out of that are good and clear. Don't know until I put it on the sawmill. Here's an example of using a wedge to help complete a cut. You cut down as far as you can. As soon as you see it's starting to close, you stop, put a wedge in the top, which will open that cut back up and allow you to continue on down and finish the cut without putting your saw into the ground. The log was too close to the ground for me to try to do an undercut to start with, which would have been the preferred way, but it doesn't happen all the time. You can see why I cut that there. There's a defect and a crook. I managed to get 4 decent 14-inch plus saw logs and a big 24-inch by 10-foot saw log out of this, plus a couple that I may be able to recover some stuff from. And this is that crotch with the rot pocket. It was bad.